It's September 15th, 1944. 8:32 a.m. The amphibious tractors of the 1st Marine Division are grinding towards the beaches of Peleliu, a 6-mile-long coral island in the Palau chain. Inside those Amtraks, Marines are sweating through their dungarees in 115-degree heat. They've been told this will take 4 days, maybe 3. The island is tiny. The Japanese garrison is estimated at 10,000 men. The Navy has been shelling Peleliu for 3 days straight. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding the bombardment group, has already radioed that he's run out of targets. The Marines are about to discover that Oldendorf couldn't have been more wrong. What makes Peleliu different from every other bloody Pacific battle isn't the casualty count, though that will be catastrophic. It's not the terrain, though that will be nightmarish. It's this. 2 weeks before those Amtraks hit the beach, Admiral William "Bull" Halsey, the most aggressive commander in the Pacific Fleet, sent an urgent message recommending the entire operation be canceled. Halsey's reasoning was sound. His 3rd Fleet pilots had been hitting Japanese positions across the Philippines and found enemy air resistance far weaker than expected. The strategic justification for Peleliu, securing General Douglas MacArthur's right flank before the Philippines invasion, had evaporated. The Japanese weren't going to threaten MacArthur from Palau. They didn't have the aircraft. They didn't have the fuel. Peleliu had become strategically irrelevant. Halsey's message went up the chain. Admiral Chester Nimitz received it. So did MacArthur. The invasion force was already at sea, 1st Marine Division loaded and steaming toward Peleliu. The machinery of war was in motion. The answer came back. Proceed as planned. Major General William Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marine Division, had already promised his men a short operation. Rough but fast, he called it. Rupertus had studied the aerial photographs. He'd reviewed the intelligence estimates. He believed his Marines would overwhelm the Japanese garrison in a matter of days through superior firepower and aggressive assault tactics. Rupertus was working with bad information. Everyone was. The intelligence officers had counted the Japanese troops. They'd mapped the beaches. They'd identified the blockhouses and pillboxes along the shoreline. What they'd missed was what Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, the Japanese commander, had spent months building inside Peleliu's central ridge, a honeycomb of over 500 caves, connected by tunnels, reinforced with steel doors and concrete, stocked with ammunition and supplies for a siege. Nakagawa wasn't planning to defend the beaches. He was planning to let the Americans come to him. The old Japanese doctrine of dying in banzai charges was finished. Nakagawa had received new orders from Tokyo. Make the Americans pay for every inch. Bleed them, slow them, kill as many as possible before the inevitable end. 4 days. That's what the brass promised. The battle would last 74. Real quick before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country, and what time is it where you are right now? Always cool to see how spread out this audience is. All right, let's get back to it. The first wave hit White Beach and Orange Beach at 8:32 a.m. Within seconds, the Marines learned that Admiral Oldendorf's "no more targets" assessment was catastrophically wrong. Japanese artillery opened up from positions the Navy bombardment hadn't touched. Mortars zeroed in on the beach. Machine guns swept the waterline from concealed bunkers. The Amtraks that had delivered the Marines became coffins. Japanese gunners had registered every yard of beach and were dropping rounds with precision. Colonel Louis Chesty Puller's 1st Marine Regiment landed on the left flank, directly beneath a coral ridge the maps called the Umerbrogel. The Marines would rename it Bloody Nose Ridge. Within the first hour, Puller's regiment took 210 casualties. By nightfall on D-Day, the 1st Marines had lost over 500 men. The regiment had expected to push inland rapidly. Instead, they were pinned against the base of a ridge that rose 300 feet above them, honeycombed with firing positions they couldn't see until the muzzle flashes gave them away. The terrain was unlike anything the Marines had encountered. Peleliu wasn't volcanic soil or sandy beaches. It was ancient coral, thrust up from the ocean floor, eroded into jagged spires and sinkholes. The ridges were a maze of limestone karst, razor-sharp peaks, hidden crevices, and sheer cliff faces. Digging foxholes was impossible. The coral shattered entrenching tools. Marines had to pile rocks for cover, exposed to Japanese fire while they stacked limestone chunks. Then there was the heat. Peleliu sits 7 degrees north of the equator. Temperatures exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity was brutal. The Navy's pre-invasion bombardment had destroyed the island's water supply infrastructure. Marines went into combat carrying 2 canteens. Some units ran dry by noon on D-Day. Heat casualties mounted, men collapsing from dehydration and heat stroke, dragged to aid stations that were already overwhelmed with wounded. General Rupertus watched the casualty reports come in and refused to adjust his timeline. He kept pushing frontal assaults against the Umurbrogol, convinced that Marine aggressiveness would crack Japanese resistance. It didn't. Nakagawa's defensive system was designed to absorb exactly this kind of attack. Each cave had multiple entrances. Marines would assault a position, take casualties, clear it with flamethrowers and demolitions, and Japanese soldiers would reoccupy it through connecting tunnels hours later. The same positions had to be taken 2, 3, 4 times. The cave system extended over 500 interconnected positions across a 2-mile stretch of ridge. Some caves held artillery pieces. Others housed hundreds of troops. Many had been improved with reinforced concrete, sliding steel doors, and ventilation systems that dispersed flamethrower fuel before it could ignite. By D.4, September 19th, the operation was supposed to be over. Instead, Chesty Puller's 1st Marines had suffered 56% casualties. More than half the regiment was dead, wounded, or evacuated due to heat prostration and combat fatigue. Puller himself was hobbling on a wounded leg, refusing evacuation, but his regiment was combat ineffective. Rupertus resisted calls to bring in Army reinforcements. He wanted this to be a Marine victory. His stubbornness would cost lives. The 1st Marines had to be pulled off the line. The regiment was finished as a fighting force. They'd landed with 3,000 men. Fewer than 1,400 walked off Peleliu under their own power, and the battle was just getting started. By September 21st, 6 days into what was supposed to be a 4-day operation, the reality was undeniable. Rupertus's aggressive tactics weren't working. The 1st Marines were wrecked. The 5th and 7th Marines were grinding forward at a cost of dozens of casualties per 100 yards gained. Something had to change. Major General Roy Geiger, commanding 3rd Amphibious Corps, flew to Peleliu to see the situation firsthand. What he found appalled him. Rupertus was still talking about quick victory while his division bled out against the Umurbrogol. Geiger overruled his subordinate. The Army's 81st Infantry Division, originally tasked with taking nearby Angkor Island, would send reinforcements. The 321st Regimental Combat Team landed on Peleliu on September 23rd. Rupertus reportedly wept when he received the order. A Marine general, watching Army soldiers come ashore to finish a Marine fight. But Geiger had no patience for inter-service pride. He had Marines dying. The Army troops brought fresh legs and full strength. More importantly, they brought a different approach. The 321st's commander, Colonel Robert Dark, assessed the Umurbrogol and recognized it for what it was. Not a battle, but a siege. You didn't storm this terrain. You reduced it, position by position, cave by cave, with methodical brutality. The tactics that emerged became known as blowtorch and corkscrew. Infantry would isolate a cave position, suppressing Japanese fire while engineers moved up. Flamethrower teams, armed with the M22 portable flamethrower, would hit the cave mouth with burning napalm-thickened fuel. The M22 had an effective range of about 40 yards and carried enough fuel for roughly 8 seconds of sustained fire. 8 seconds to fill a cave entrance with flame. If the flamethrower didn't kill everyone inside, demolition teams followed. Engineers packed C2 explosive into the cave mouths, sometimes hundreds of pounds per position, and sealed them permanently. The Japanese inside either died from the blast, suffocated when the ventilation collapsed, or were entombed alive. It was horrific work. Flamethrower operators were priority targets for Japanese snipers. The tanks carrying flame fuel, M4 Shermans modified with the Satan flame system, drew every anti-tank weapon the Japanese had. The Satan units could project flame over 80 yards, enough to reach positions infantry couldn't approach, but getting them into position meant navigating terrain that shredded tank tracks and exposed crews to point-blank fire from hidden positions. The Marines and Army troops developed a grim routine. Locate a cave, suppress it, burn it, blow it, move to the next one. Progress was measured in yards per day, sometimes feet. Each cave cost casualties. Each ridge demanded blood. Armored bulldozers became essential. The Marines had brought D7 Caterpillars fitted with armor plating to protect operators from small arms fire. These machines carved roads into the coral ridges, allowing tanks and supplies to reach positions that had been inaccessible. When a cave proved impossible to assault, bulldozers simply buried the entrance under tons of coral rubble, sealing the Japanese inside their own fortress. Colonel Nakagawa watched his defensive system perform exactly as designed. He was losing men, but slowly. Every American casualty vindicated his strategy. Tokyo had ordered him to make the Americans pay, and he was delivering. His radio reports to Palau headquarters documented each day's resistance with professional detachment. The breakthrough wasn't a single moment. It was the grinding acceptance that Peleliu would be won through attrition, not assault. The question wasn't whether the Americans would take the island. The question was, how many would die doing it? By late September, the battle had compressed into a kill zone, roughly 400 yards wide and 900 yards long. The Umerbrogel Pocket. This was Nakagawa's final redoubt, the most heavily fortified section of an already fortress-like ridge system. Inside, an estimated 1,500 Japanese soldiers remained, dug into caves that American firepower couldn't reach. The terrain defied description. Sheer coral walls, crevices that dropped 50 feet without warning, ridgelines so narrow that 2 men couldn't walk abreast. The names Marines gave these features told the story. Death Valley, Horseshoe Canyon, 5 Sisters, the China Wall. Each name represented dozens of casualties. On September 28th, the 5th Marines launched a coordinated assault on the 5 Sisters, 5 coral knobs rising side by side, each honeycombed with caves. The attack stalled within hours. Japanese defenders had interlocking fields of fire. Knock out one position, and 3 others had angles on the same ground. Marines died trying to take hills they'd already captured the day before. The command structure shifted. On October 12th, the 81st Infantry Division formally assumed control of operations on Peleliu. The battered 1st Marine Division began withdrawing, regiment by regiment. They'd been fighting for nearly a month. The 5th Marines had taken 43% casualties. The 7th Marines had lost over 46%. The 1st Marines, Chesty Puller's regiment, had effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. Army troops inherited the pocket. The 321st and 323rd Infantry Regiments continued the blowtorch and corkscrew reduction with methodical patience. There was no more talk of quick victory, just the daily grind of burning and burying. October dragged into November. Each day brought a few more yards, a few more sealed caves, a few more American casualties. Japanese resistance never broke. It simply shrank. Nakagawa's men fought from ever smaller perimeters, emerging at night to infiltrate American lines, raid supply dumps, and kill sentries. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow could hide a Japanese soldier with a bayonet. The mathematics of the pocket were brutal. American commanders estimated they were killing Japanese defenders at a ratio of roughly 10-1. But in a fortified position where every assault meant crossing open ground under fire, even favorable ratios produced staggering American losses. Winning 10-1 didn't feel like winning when the butcher's bill came due each morning. On November 24th, 70 days after D-Day, Colonel Nakagawa sent his final message to Palau. "Our sword is broken, and we have run out of spears." He burned his regimental colors. Then, according to Japanese accounts, Nakagawa and his remaining senior officer performed ritual suicide in their command cave. His body was never recovered by American forces. Organized resistance ended the following day. Peleliu was declared secure on November 27, 1944. 74 days after those Amtraks had hit the beach. The final count? 10,695 Japanese defenders killed. Only 202 prisoners taken, and most of those were Korean laborers, not combat troops. Nakagawa's garrison had fought almost literally to the last man. The American cost? 2,336 killed in action, 8,450 wounded. Total casualties approached 9,800 from a landing force of roughly 28,000 men. The 1st Marine Division alone suffered 6,526 casualties, a rate exceeding 30% of the division's strength. For a single tiny island. For an objective that Admiral Halsey had correctly identified as strategically worthless 2 weeks before the 1st Marine hit the beach. The airfield the Marines had bled to capture, the entire strategic justification for Operation Stalemate 2, saw minimal use for the remainder of the war. A handful of transport flights, some emergency landings, nothing that influenced the Philippines campaign, nothing that couldn't have been accomplished from other bases already in American hands. MacArthur invaded Leyte on October 20, 1944, while Marines and soldiers were still dying in the Umur-Brogel pocket. His right flank faced no threat from Palau. Japanese air power in the region had been shattered months earlier. Halsey's pre-invasion assessment had been correct. Peleliu was strategically unnecessary. The operation proceeded anyway because the machinery of war, once set in motion, proved impossible to stop. The 1st Marine Division paid the price for that institutional inertia. The division was so badly mauled that it required 6 months of rest and rebuilding on Pavuvu in the Russell Islands. While other Marine divisions hit Iwo Jima in February 1945, the 1st Division was still recovering. They wouldn't see combat again until Okinawa in April. And even there, veterans noticed the division had never fully recovered its pre-Peleliu strength and cohesion. General Rupertus never faced official censure for his conduct of the battle. He died of a heart attack in March 1945, just months after Peleliu, at age 55. Some historians have speculated the stress of the campaign contributed to his death. Others have been less charitable, noting that his insistence on frontal assaults and his resistance to army reinforcements extended the battle and increased casualties unnecessarily. The real legacy of Peleliu lay in what it taught American commanders about Japanese defensive doctrine. Nakagawa's cave system became the template. When Marines landed on Iwo Jima 5 months later, they faced the same tactics on a larger scale. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had studied Peleliu's defense and improved upon it. The blowtorch and corkscrew methods developed in the Umur-Brogol became standard operating procedure. The flamethrower tanks that proved essential on Peleliu were deployed in greater numbers on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. But the tactical lessons came at a cost that military historians still debate. Was Peleliu a necessary education, or a catastrophic waste of life? The question has no clean answer. The Marines who died taking the Five Sisters didn't die for nothing. Their sacrifice revealed enemy tactics that saved lives later. But they also died for an island that didn't need to be taken, in a battle that didn't need to be fought, because an admiral's recommendation was ignored, and a general's pride wouldn't bend. Peleliu never achieved the fame of Iwo Jima or Guadalcanal. There was no iconic flag-raising photograph, no moment of triumph that captured the public imagination. Just a grinding 2-month siege on a forgotten coral island, fought after the strategic calculus had already shifted, producing casualties that seemed, even at the time, disproportionate to any conceivable gain. The Marines who survived rarely spoke about Peleliu. Eugene Sledge, a mortarman with the 5th Marines, later wrote one of the war's most harrowing memoirs, With the Old Breed. His account of Peleliu describes a landscape of rotting corpses, unbearable heat, and psychological disintegration. Peleliu, Sledge wrote, was incomprehensible. Nearly 10,000 American casualties, 74 days instead of 4. An admiral's warning dismissed. A general's pride unchecked. An island that didn't matter, defended by men who refused to stop fighting, attacked by men who were never told the truth about what they faced. That's Peleliu, the battle that should never have been fought. The victory that proved nothing except how much young men can endure when their leaders fail them.